So I want to introduce our next panel and let you know that we're now moving from the high-level space of what's going on at the global level, the strategy, the tensions, the geopolitical tensions, and some of the dynamics that are playing out around women's participation from a high-level statistical perspective into the energy mix. And what Silas did in his presentation is he actually presented that there's a lot of technologies that need to come to bear in the energy access, energy security, and energy transition conversation. For the purposes of today, what we've done is we've brought a panel that can speak across the majority of them. Mr. Dumisani Ngala, who's the Senior Vice President for Low Carbon Energy Solutions at Sasol. We have Dr. Rithabile Melamu, who is the CEO of the South African Photovoltaic Industry Association. And then we have Thabo Mlekwa, who also just happens to be my boss, who's the MD of Siemens Energy. You see, if you know me, I'm going to out you. Who happens to be the MD of Siemens Energy Southern Africa. What we'll do is every speaker is going to provide some of their input. Again, we're drawing this back into what's the critical information around the value chain, around these technologies. Where do we see women playing? How can they play? And the different speakers will take their own take on that. We'll start with Dumisani. Please, can we load his presentation? Dumisani, do you have the remote? No, I don't have. Can we have the remote up here, please, as well? There it is. Okay.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dumisani, and I will put my presentation in context because it's going to be a bit dry from the other presentations that you have seen, but also it's not going to touch on some of the critical areas such as the women participation. My boss, who just spoke now, she covered that well, and I think the rest of the speakers covered it well. And also, it's not going to talk significantly about just transition, energy just transition. Silas, as well as Dr. Ramohoba, actually leading the hydrogen space. So you heard him speak passionately about how South Africa needs to balance between the transition and as well as the need for energy security. So he covered it well, so I'm not going to touch on that. And Dr. Ramohoba was recently appointed as the Green Hydrogen Chair for Africa. So we well covered in that respect. And then on the commercialization, also I'm not going to talk significantly about it. Rebecca is with her team have been leading the commercialization of hydrogen in South Africa. So that has been covered. So if you want more information, she can share with you on the hydrogen roadmap. And we also, as South Africa, we're developing the commercialization strategy for the country. So what I'm going to share with you are the opportunities in this space, specifically looking at hydrogen. But we don't look at hydrogen in isolation. We look at hydrogen as an energy source. An energy source that is specifically looking to close the gap between where you can fully decarbonize with renewable energy, wind and solar, but also in terms of hydro as well as an opportunity. There is this gap that is called hard-to-abate industries, where we believe hydrogen will play a significant role. And these are the opportunities companies like Sasol, ArcelorMittal are looking at. But these are the opportunities that also create a great opportunity for people that want to play a role in the industry. So those are the areas that I'm going to cover. But I'm speaking, although I'm talking from a Sasol perspective, two things. One is look at it from an industry's perspective. These are mostly industries that are looking at the same, are facing the same challenges, but are also looking at the same opportunity. The second part, how fast this transition is going to happen and how deep it's going to happen is really continuously being informed by various signposts, such as the policies the government are putting in place, such as the technology, how quickly the electrolyzer technology is going to come down, and Thabo is working on that, and how quickly South Africa is going to localize the production of solar and wind, and I think we will cover that as well. And those will inform how quickly the transition that I'm going to speak about is going to happen. And the other element is that although I work for Sasol, please don't use this information to invest on Sasol shares, because they could it could turn out different because of these signposts that I've just mentioned. So the key areas that, as I mentioned, people always talk about, but why would you need hydrogen when I can use renewable energy? It's an expensive way to move to use renewable energy. Hydrogen is going to be used primarily in areas where you can't use direct electricity. So some of the areas that we're already working on in South Africa include the production of ammonia. Ammonia is important for fertilizer, as you know, for mining explosives, and as well as it's going to be the primary way to transport energy in the future. So you'll see some of the industry that are going to be actually using ammonia as an energy source. Japan is already doing co-firing of ammonia into the coal fire stations. So when we talk about earlier on about clean coal and how do we retain our existing infrastructure and at the same time be able to decarbonize, ammonia is going to play that part in terms of if we can produce it in a sustainable way. But then there's other areas, I'm not going to touch on all of them, but some of the critical ones that we have as a country, and you'll see, I think Celeste did speak to about the CBAM. CBAM, what Europe is essentially saying is that they're going to decarbonize their industries. So anybody bringing a product from any other country will now have to pay a carbon tax. And if you read the latest market information, South Africa is actually going to be the most affected by CBAM globally, not just in Africa, particularly our steel industry. But then if you add the agriculture, if you add the export of the minerals, the impact is going to be significant on the country. As much as we can look east, the challenge is that how do we, at the same time, retain the current market that we have? As they say, a bird in hand is worth more than two, so we need to find a way of retaining that, but retain it in a way that we can be competitive. The other one that I'm just going to touch on quickly is on the heavy-duty mobility. And the heavy-duty mobility is the one that, through the DSI, we've really been driving hard because we believe we can produce hydrogen and power the transport industry. This will help primarily the heavy trucks instead of using, because they'll struggle to carry battery and still have enough payload to transport product across the regions. The other part is we also, in areas where the trains cannot be electrified, the hydrogen can play that role. But what then it creates on the right-hand side, it creates the opportunity, some of the industries that already were female players in them, and that is fuel cell. The production of fuel cell is actually one of the key areas that we believe South Africa can become a major player. And because we have the minerals and we have the technology. University of Northwest, for instance, is a leader in this space. Some of you might have seen it. They were, last week, they were running a symposium on international conference on electrolysis. And it brought everybody, like most industries that Rebecca referred to, from across the world, and to discuss this opportunity. So when it comes to the technology and the skills participation, we're already there. It's really about how do we implement, how do we monetize the opportunities. Maybe the last one, to be selfish, that I want to mention is the aviation industry. Aviation industry is going to struggle to decarbonize, even to use hydrogen, because when you use hydrogen as an energy source, you need to put a different technology which actually generate the power, and that's the fuel cell that I just mentioned. So the alternative to that is to decarbonize how you produce the fuel of today. And that's where Sasol's opportunity comes in. Our technology that we use in Sasolburg and Secunda, for those that know those places, actually can use any source of carbon and can use any source of hydrogen to produce the same fuels. So what we're looking to do is to get green hydrogen, get sustainable carbon source, whether it's capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or getting it from biomass or industry source, and then be able to produce the current petrol, the current diesel, current aviation fuel and in a sustainable way. And that allows us to keep those facilities going, but also to decarbonize the industries. And this is one of the opportunities that South Africa, between Petro SA and Sasol, we could be a world leader, because it's very difficult. Professor will tell you, we struggle to get some of these projects in Uzbekistan, trying to get this technology deployed there. It has been successful deployed at the technology provided by Sasol. So it's Professor's a baby now in Uzbekistan. That advantage in South Africa, other countries still have to come to this level. It was a case in the past in terms of, because of its emission intensity, but now it's an opportunity for South Africa to leapfrog just about most of the countries, because to build a Secunda or a Sasolburg takes a significant amount of technology and the risk. Maybe the last point to make on the opportunity is the volumes that we're talking about. So just to give you an idea, Sasol currently is the world's biggest producer of hydrogen. But the hydrogen we produce is gray, and we produce 2 million tons, more than 2.5 million tons of that gray hydrogen. To convert that whole gray hydrogen we produce in Secunda and Sasolburg to green hydrogen, you will need the amount of electricity that currently the country generates. So you need over 50 gigawatts to convert Sasol into green hydrogen and produce sustainable source. So when you see these numbers, which says, and that's for 2 million, when you see the opportunity for South Africa, that is 7 million, essentially it gives you an idea how much electricity deployment needs to happen. So between the technology providers and the policymakers, this is the North Star that we're shooting towards. And this will include opportunity to become a major exporter, global player of the opportunity. Maybe I'm going to move a bit quicker. And the reason why we're very confident why South Africa can become the major player is that we have all the makings of it. We have the land and wind. So there's about 4 regions that really are very competitive in this space. One is in South America, particularly Chile. Then you have North Africa. Then you have Australia. And then one of the regions that matches these regions is Southern Africa. So Southern Africa, between South Africa and Namibia, then if you add DRC with hydro and Mozambique with hydro, then we could become one of the, essentially the future energy maker like OPEC was in the past, by harnessing our collaboration across the region. As we saw on the power pool, we could actually do the same for hydrogen in terms of how we develop it. But in addition, because of our location and our geopolitics, we have a good relations across the world, so we can export to most of the region. The last part is really the fact that we actually have the world's biggest deposit of PGMs, which are the key inputs into the development of of one of the technologies, which is the electrolysis and the fuel cell. And I think if some of you might have seen the Anglo track that was recently announced, that's really what it brings everything together. It brings the technology, it brings the fuel cell, which is made of the PGM, it brings the decarbonization of that industry, and it highlights some of the end uses of hydrogen. And then maybe from a Sasol perspective, to be quick, we have prioritized a number of use cases. Not that these are the only ones, but there could be so many of them. So it's for companies and industry players and people that want to participate in this industry, you could actually choose which one of those you have the inclination of to play in. But in addition to that, there's supporting industry. Like I said, when you need the amount of renewable energy that you'll need to build, like we spoke about, skills, you need to build infrastructure and so forth. So for Sasol, these are the industries. So we're prioritizing decarbonization of already existing infrastructure, but also, as I mentioned, South Africa being a major exporter of sustainable aviation fuel. This is an extract from the current work that is happening in terms of this space, and it highlights some of the areas where, when we talk about the SMMEs, where they could play, and we're not talking about them in the sense of being if I can use that word, being a small player. These are the areas that people can come and build significant business out of by looking at the entire value chain and choosing a specific area to focus on, whether it's the manufacturing of technology, whether it's providing service, including education, training, but also in terms of some of the opportunities, in terms of other areas where it's around the agriculture, where if you can produce your product from South Africa, it will be first organic. Secondly, it will be sustainable because you'll have used sustainable fertilizer. So you could actually, that could be an opportunity that is almost auxiliary to the direct hydrogen or sustainable low carbon, but it will be a huge beneficiary of it because you'll be able to go across the world and say, I'm the only one who produced organic wine that is sustainably produced. And this is an opportunity that when you look at the way although we talk as if we're decarbonizing energy, we actually could play anywhere in the value chain. Maybe the last thing, to the policymakers and the financiers, the bankers and the legal people and everybody else, it's going to require a lot of policy development. It's going to require significant funding to get this industry going. It's still a very, very new industry, so there's less development in the industry. But what will be key, we heard about the 8.5 billion. It has created so much noise, and it also comes with a bit of negative press because people are like, oh, South Africa is not taking the 8.5 billion. But what they don't tell you is why it's not taking the 8.5 billion. But we need, as we said, one of the things that we have been arguing from an industry perspective is that actually we don't need so much the grant than the access to market, because the access to market will make a difference for us. Europe particularly is putting a lot of regulations on what they consider sustainable from their perspective, which could make us, even if we decarbonize, still not be able to access those markets. So the policymakers, and we're working very closely with Dr. Mohoba and the Green Hydrogen Council in terms of trying to get that into that industry. And the last one that I want to mention is just about partnership and collaboration across industries. And I think that is what will make us even more successful in order to bring new industries, but to bring everybody else along with it. Thank you so much.
Tumisani. We now have our input from the CEO of the South Africa Photovoltaic Industry Association, Dr. Rita Bile.
Thank you very much. Am I on? Yes, thank you very much, Program Director. Prof, thank you for inviting me, or me and Sabvia. It really is an honor. I'm always excited when I see men-led initiatives. Always tell a story that I'm privileged to have been born of a very assertive woman who owns her spaces, but also of a father who made me believe, or us, the girls, believe that we can do anything. And from the very early stage, from the very early age, I've always had it in mind that I can do anything I put my mind to it, to a point where when we get into these C-suite spaces, if men, apologies, gentlemen, misbehave in any way, I see them more as a character flaw as opposed to trying to get at women. And I think the message that I'm trying to convey is that male counterparts, fathers, invest in your girls because you change their world. And that's what my father did for me. So maybe I don't have a presentation moderator, but I will outline the opportunities. But before I do, Ndatenkala has already done it for me. He's already told you that Eskom alone needs about 50 gigawatt of renewable energy, and that is probably a mixture of solar and PV. But I'd like to make 2 points before I go into where the opportunities are in the solar space. The first one is that the solar sector in South Africa is one of the fastest growing sectors. I'm going to share the figures shortly, but I think if there is one takeaway from this session is that if I have a business, if I have a skill to deploy, that's a sector that I want to look out for. Not just PV, but also wind energy. The second point is that these opportunities are not available to women alone. They're available to everybody. Men, women, young people, the elderly. And 2 things need to happen for us to access those opportunities. The first one is that as women, we need to show up. We need to do research for ourselves. We need to do what's in our power to make sure that we position ourselves for these opportunities. Then those that are in places of leadership, it is your responsibility to create a conducive environment for women to access these opportunities. I mean, in most of these conversations, I think we talk about where these opportunities are, and it's good for people to understand where they are. But increasingly, Prof, would like to hear what other peoples have done so that leaders can copy. What are the practical instruments that have been implemented that have enabled women to access their opportunities? Because then we can replicate the great models that are available. So it will take initiative from women, but it will also take leadership. And I'm glad there are lots of leaders in the room. Leaders to make sure that policies, procurement policies, how many women do you procure services from? And not just on paper. We don't want paper. And when you report on them, don't throw figures around 5 billion. What is the 5 billion based on? 5 billion of what? So that we know exactly what the procurement spend is going towards. So I'm using that as a mere example. I want to go into the actual opportunities. So in order for me to map out where these opportunities are, I did indicate that I would go into a bit of statistics about the growth of the sector. And I'm going to use solar modules as just one example. And just to give you a sense of how much we've been importing as a country to deal with our energy security challenges. In 2020, just solar PV modules alone, I'm not talking inverters, I'm not talking batteries. We in 2020, we imported about 1 billion rands worth of solar modules. 1 billion. In 2022, after COVID, that value rose to 5.6 billion. Right? This is in 2022 alone, fivefold. In 2023, the first 2 quarters of 2023, we are sitting at 11 billion worth of it. And as I say, I'm just using this to drive a point. It is a growing sector. It's growing rapidly. And there are opportunities to be exploited across the value chain. And the opportunities reside in manufacturing. And when you talk about manufacturing, yes, we need to look at value chain. We need to consider modules. But sometimes our government is so fixated on modules that they miss out on 60% of balance of plant that makes up a solar plant. There are cables. There are companies in South Africa that are manufacturing cables. World standard. Those can be expanded, right? Women can plug in there and make businesses and expand businesses. It's a relatively low barrier sector to go into compared to the modules, which are dominated by the big companies in China, right? So balance of steel works. So the opportunities are there. And just for information, Sapvia commissioned a study last year that maps out localization potential and opportunities along the value chain. So if you're a partner of ours and you haven't had access to that study, or if you are a member, and I don't think the 2 gentlemen are a member yet, you need that study. You need that study. You need to see where the opportunities are. But that's why we're able to say, hang on, why are we so fixated on modules? Yes, we need to localize that to some extent, but there are capabilities and capacity that exists already. Why don't we take and exploit those opportunities already? So, yeah, that's the one indicator for how fast the sector is growing. The second a point that I want to bring across is that the private market, so the utility market, so the utility, and I know most of you are aware what the utility scale projects are, but those are the big farms in the Northern Cape, in the Western Cape, in the Eastern Cape. The development of projects has largely been dominated by the REAP, the government-led procurement program. That has since changed. That has since changed because of the regulatory reforms that government introduced, the Schedule 2 of the Electricity Regulation Act, the ERA, to a point where the private sector utility market is growing so fast that whilst these projects no longer need a license, they need to be registered with a regulator. And the regulator does have his own spreadsheet there that he posts on his platform once in a while. But it's really not intelligible, it's very difficult to follow. So what SAPVIA has done is to package that information, and that is available to members and non-members. You can find it on our website. But what we observed is that at the beginning of the year, only 2 gigawatts of projects were registered with the national regulator. At the end of July, we had 5.18 gigawatts of projects registered with the regulator. And these are projects that are being developed by the private sector. So a mine would buy electricity that's generated in the Northern Cape and wheel it through the infrastructure and use it wherever they are across the country. Lastly, to just show you how fast-paced our sector is growing, is that for the first time last year in 2022, we estimate that we saw 1 gigawatt of installed capacity at residential, commercial, and industrial alone, because there was no project, a utility scale project that came online in 2022. We are just finalizing, again, a study that uses GIS and artificial intelligence to zoom into what the actual installed capacity is. If you go to municipalities, they don't know. If you go to Eskom, they actually don't know what the installed capacity is. The import data isn't clear. It's helpful, but not clear. But just to give you a sneak peek, Gauteng alone, I'm not going to say the exact figure, has installed capacity of more than 1 gig. Gauteng alone. And that is at residential and CI market alone. So this is a growing sector. This is a sector that women need to familiarize themselves around the opportunities. Maybe let me get to the opportunities just to close my input, moderator. The way we look at opportunities is through the market segmentation lens. So you have the utility scale, which I've already referred to, which has for the longest time been driven by the government program, the REAP, and then there is now a growing private market sector. Then there's a CNI market, and then there's a residential market. Very quickly, I'm going to outline where the opportunities are in the utility scale. So from the utility scale point of view, you have opportunities for business, people who want to open their own business from a development point of view, as well as people that are looking to diversify into different markets, professionals. So in the development of these projects, for instance, you need legal expertise. Are you a legal person who wants to get into the renewable energy space? There is space for you. Accountants, environmentalists, environmental scientists. There are lots of, in the wind more than solar, because you even need bird specialists, people who understand the dynamics around the bird movement. So there are a lot of opportunities for people that are looking to develop their careers there. If you want to start a business, it's a very resource-intensive space to work in. Approximately, you need about 10 million to prepare one project. If you consider it and you want to put it through a bid window, if you are targeting a public procurement program. If you bid for three, you have 5 to 10 million times 3. Right? That is really intensive, and most women don't have access to those resources. That's why it's a big guy's game. What kind of interventions are required? And Dr. Salas, women need access to funding. So IDC says there is money. Women knock at the IDC's office. The requirements themselves are prohibitive. They can't access any of those resources that DBSA and IDC claims to have. So that's where we're talking about leadership. That's where leadership is required. How do you, at a switch of a pen, I think Dr. Rebecca made reference of Minister Pando, who decided that I'm going to ensure that 50% of the head of these centers of competencies are women. Where is the leadership in that? Until then, you will leave crumbs for women. The guys who are making big money are the ones that are in the development. Yes, you can make careers in there. The same goes for when you work in the IPP, you are an asset owner. And the IPPs, do you know where the IPPs, most IPPs are from? It's because they have deep pockets. They have deep pockets. And there are good examples of women that are now getting into the space. I think the Lindas, and our friend whose name I forget, I'll remember. But we can't be counting 2-3 women. 10 years into the REAP program, counting 12% of the women who benefited from the REAP program, and we want transformation. So that's why I'm saying, on the one hand, it's about initiative. On the second hand, it's about, on the second point that I want to make across, it's about strategic leadership. On the engineering procurement, so now you develop the project, you're an asset owner, now you want to construct it. That is also very competitive. You can get employment opportunities as a procurement specialist, as an engineer, as a legal person, as a construction specialist. You can. There's an opportunity to work for EPCs. But if you want to own an EPC, it's a problem. Right. So maybe just that maps out where the opportunities are. I know I'm identifying where the challenges are and where hurdles and barriers need to be unlocked. But I thought I should, whilst I'm mapping out where the opportunities reside, I should also share what, in my view, is critical and is required to unlock those opportunities. And lastly, because the CNI and the utility markets are similar, they may have nuances. But residential market, sure. As I indicated that we saw about 1 gigawatt, and Gauteng alone, we estimate that it has about close to 50,000 of installations, and these are growing. Especially when we are at stage 6 load shedding, we see a spike in the number of demands for system for our members, from our members. So the opportunities there really is for electricians. Women electricians, look out for opportunity to upskill yourself so that you can operate in the installation space. And what I know has been prohibitive in that space is the cost of the training. That's why we appreciate the support that we got from EWCETA, from CEO, who was able to lend a hand and help train 20 electricians. I should tell you that the application date was yesterday, and for 20 people, we got about 350 applications of people, mainly women. So private sector, do partner with industry association to avail those opportunities for women who want to play in this space. Even if you say, I'm going for 50 women installers, electricians that are upskilled, that are able to operate in that space, I think that will make a dent. So I think I will stop it here, moderator, and take questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Rebecca. Okay, we'll now move to our last speaker before we move to Q&A. Thabo from Siemens Energy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone and all protocols observed. It's a pleasure to be here, and also some very insightful comments from my panel members. I actually have a video as part of my my intro remarks, and then I'll close after that. But I think the assertion I want to make is that it's been shown that a combination of technology and talent, is associated with good economic growth and development. And that's at the heart of what I want to show here. And in this video, I want to start showing by, we've kind of internally in Siemens Energy spent some time to try and imagine what the future would look like, because when you talk about opportunities in the value chain and so on, is perhaps let's sketch out what the future should look like, what we think will look like, some of the technologies that are involved and so on, and then thereby you are able to see where you can fit in and how. And then later on I'll talk about the talent bit.
Imagine a world with zero CO2 emissions. Imagine that all power is generated from renewable sources and used in all sectors of public life. But how can we get there? The answer is simple. Step by step, join us on the road to decarbonization. Let's start with something simple that lowers CO2 emissions immediately. Let's start by increasing efficiency in power generation. Coal-fired plants can produce the same power output with less fuel when old steam turbines are upgraded or replaced with new high-efficiency turbines. Or take a bold step and convert coal plants into highly efficient gas-fired combined cycle plants. And then there's still more to do. We could upgrade the gas turbines or replace them with new, more efficient models. Data-driven digital tools are another way to optimize a plant's performance and increase efficiency even more. With renewables coming into play, we need to increase flexibility and think about storage solutions. For example, let's look at flex power solutions. Fast starts and stops allow for greater flexibility and lower fuel consumption. And think about short-term storage solutions. Batteries add black start capability and balance load differences resulting from fluctuating renewable infeed. Imagine providing efficient heating and cooling from thermal plants with combined heat and power. By adding industrial-scale heat pumps, even renewable sources could be tied in. The further we walk down the road towards decarbonization, the larger the share of renewables in the mix. This brings new challenges, and we need to further improve flexibility and grid stability. Grid stability measures like implementing a synchronous condenser is one way to compensate power fluctuations. Renewables, battery storage and heat pumps will enable the development of more and more CO2-neutral decentralized hybrid solutions. A backup from conventional sources will still be needed when battery reserves are low and the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. Now add electrolyzers into the equation. They turn excess power from renewables into hydrogen that can be stored in large quantities. This creates entirely new options. Gas turbines can now be co-fired with hydrogen and natural gas to further reduce CO2 emissions. Today, some smaller gas turbines are already capable of burning 100% hydrogen, and in the future, more models will be able to do the same. They would enable the design of CO2-free decentral solutions fully powered by renewable sources. This can be done by combining electrolyzers and storage solutions with re-electrification in small hydrogen-fired combined heat and power plants. With renewables at the heart of our energy systems, storage systems become essential. Short-term storage solutions like batteries need to be supplemented. That's where mid-term thermal storage solutions using heat pumps and long-term storage solutions like green hydrogen come into play. Imagine the scalability. Add in more sectors. Mobility, industry, agriculture. Imagine capturing CO2 from industrial processes or directly from the air. Combine it with hydrogen to make e-fuels that can power transportation on land, on water, and in the air. Now we've reached the point where we're generating all our electrical energy from renewable sources and transforming the excess power into chemical energy sources like green hydrogen, which can then be transferred to other sectors. Imagine a world with zero CO2 emissions. Let's make sustainable, affordable, and reliable energy a reality for all of our tomorrows. Imagine that.
So I thought this video will be quite useful because it sketches the journey we have to traverse. And the core takeaway for me is technology, that's not the issue actually. I think for me it's the secondary part of the talent aspect, because if you look at the value chain of opportunities, Retabile spoke well around, there's what I call the traditional ones, there's jobs, technical, non-technical you could look at. There's different businesses that could be started. But also there's a social element that could come in, social roles that are important and that's brought about by some of these opportunities. But the ones that we don't often also talk about are the new and the unknown, the innovative jobs that tend to come through. And those are either brought by digitalization, so talk about 3D manufacturing, 3D printing and so on. Some of our turbines already we're starting to print some of the vanes using 3D, 4IR as part of those. Drone technology is also starting to be one of those, and if we get a chance, I'll show you a video of something that could be quite useful for us. And then also one thing that I've noticed are innovative business models as opportunities. So for instance, there's legislative changes that are coming through that could bring about different business models. So there's an interesting business in Namibia that they do a renewable energy trading platform that they've put together where they're putting large power users, financiers, and so on, and they are able to trade on that platform. It takes away the issue of bankability, from signing your offtake agreements and so on. That business was never there. That model would never have existed. But because of the opportunities and the legislative changes that are there, they are able to do that. And more we're now seeing the pay-per-use or subscription type businesses coming across, and those are some of the opportunities. Doesn't have to be always in the traditional sense. And then I think with all these huge opportunities, I think that the essence is that we must prepare, and whether the question is, are we preparing enough? There's a nice, last night I was thinking of there's a story of a man who was fishing. And as he was fishing, he would catch a fish and put it next to a ruler, and then if it's above a certain size, he throws it back. If it's within a size, he puts it in his bucket, and so he carries on. So this other one is watching him, and he says, "Sorry, I've been watching you for some time in the morning. So you take the bigger fishes, you throw them back into the water." But the ones that are within a certain size, you keep them. Is there something philosophical about this this approach. And the young man who was fishing said, actually, no, there's nothing philosophical about it. I have a pen at home, and the pen is exactly the same diameter as this ruler. And therefore, I don't need the big fish. I just need only this fish that I need in my pen. And I think we don't realize how much we have to expand our pens. We don't realize how much you have to expand your capabilities. Because a lot of these opportunities, you won't get them with limited capabilities. You expand your capabilities so that you are able to receive this. And I think that will be my closing introductions around developing your capabilities.
So, yes. We need bigger pans. Yeah, bigger pans, a bigger kitchen. Quite a lot from the technology perspective, and I think we wanted everybody in the room, everybody in the overflow, to really get a deep dive into the value chains, because there's so much in there. I think what's coming out of this panel clearly is the professional, the technical diversification is probably the easiest part. If you're already a professional, if you're already a lawyer, an accountant, if you're already in certain industries, you can leapfrog into this industry. Where it gets more difficult is when you start getting into the more challenging spaces where you have higher hurdles for entry, such as manufacturing, being developers, IPPs, EPCs, where the so-called big boys play. So we are going to take a round of questions, and I'm going to ask you again, be provocative, because we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have the guy who's leading clean, new energies and driving Sasol's transition into a completely new business model. We've got the CEO of Sabvia on the table, and we've got Siemens Energy's MD for Southern Africa here. So any questions? We'll take them from the floor. I have mine, and I'm just going to reserve them in case nothing comes from the floor. We've got a hand in the front. There's one in the middle, and there's two more in the front here. We'll take a round of three, and then we will answer those and then go back to the floor. Please stand up and let us know who you are and where you're from.
Thank you. My name is Musa Nyamande. I'm a co-founder at Chronology, which is a software development company creating solutions for different industries. So my first question is regarding vertical integration of these value chains, particularly from a local perspective. So my question is to the panel, to what extent of local research and development is there into creating components and equipment for this new energy mix, and also steering it towards local manufacturing, distribution, installation, and even servicing, also going towards the training and the skills development for this equipment, which ultimately would have been developed here locally. And again, to put it into context, we have Siemens is a German company which works in this space, and it's a multinational company which will likely supply the equipment and components, likely do the engineering works to install it, service it, maintain it, upgrade it, etc. So to what extent also can we collaborate with an organization like Siemens to then create a local sector and a local economy for this equipment and these components, which will be a very integral part of this new energy mix. So I'll just put that to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Next hand was up. Okay. There were two more hands here, and then there was one at the back behind you. Yeah.
Tanya Swanepoel, Old Mutual Alternative Investments. Just a question for you, Dumisani. You sketched out, 2050. What would 2030 look like, briefly?
Thank you. I'm Nyasha Movirimi from FinEnergy Advisory Services. So my question is on the grid infrastructure. In the last program or bid windows, there haven't been allocations in certain provinces because of lack of grid capacity. So I would like to channel this question to Thabo, I think. And maybe Silas, if he has appetite for it. What would you tell a lady who wants to get into the grid infrastructure, as in you want to increase capacity and be part of that new build in transmission infrastructure? Thank you.
Okay, we've had our first 3 questions. Let's respond to those. In the meantime, ushers, please identify the next 3. We'll come to you, Dumisani. What does 2030 look like? You showed us 2050.
Am I audible?
You're audible.
Yes. Can I just touch on the local component manufacturing, which talks to my point about 2030, right? Is that what I was painting about what Sasol needs and what South Africa needs is essentially quite multiple times what the world needs. So what that means is that the access to things like electrolyzer, panels, windmill is going to be very difficult. So the ability to produce some of these equipment locally is going to make all the difference how quickly you can scale up. So from a ability to execute the projects, which essentially then allows you to decarbonize, is really going to be dependent at the end of the day about how your supply chains work. And a part of it also is going to be the reason why you also want to manufacture locally is that it then lowers your cost of production. Currently, the green hydrogen we're talking about sits at around $5 to $6 a kg. The gray hydrogen alternative sits at $1 per kg. As much as companies are ambitious to decarbonize, the difference in cost is so significant that they have to moderate the pace at which they can decarbonize. So, but I think Rebecca could talk even better on this specific point about creating the supply chains, particularly locally, to allow the faster scaling up. And then from a Sasol perspective, is that these signposts that we're referring to, around one is the legislation, which the government has been very effective in terms of putting some of the framework which enable the industry. I'm talking more primarily on the green hydrogen. So that industry, from a Sasol perspective, we're starting with the catalytic projects to enables us to get to that industry. And the easiest part is to repurpose the existing assets. So we already have a couple of projects that are looking to do that. In Sasolburg, we have started producing green hydrogen by repurposing an existing electrolyzer, but we can repurpose a lot of those assets. So our 2030 view is going to be, we need to do the catalytic projects because they allow us to learn and bring down the cost. But most of the decarbonization and reduction on emissions is going to be really about making the plants efficient, bringing in renewable energy where you can put it in directly, and we out in the market for renewable energy. We looking to procure up to 1.2 gigawatts. That is relatively easy as long as we can get the grid system, because then it's a direct application. But once you move beyond that, where we need the biggest volume, which is as a feedstock, hydrogen as a feedstock, that's where the challenge for 2030 lies, where how quickly can we decarbonize? And also because we use so much coal, is to reduce the coal and bring in more gas in the meantime. That allows us to lower the emissions. But the rest of the stuff is really about getting started, but how quickly scale up is going to happen is really going to be dependent on a lot of enabling policies and infrastructure to really scale up quicker. So, but what is important, just to add one point, is that most people now, I think same to Tanya, are no longer interested in hearing your 2050 strategy. Because the problem with that is that then people let it slide until 2040, then they start talking. So most companies, Sasol, like most companies, we really, when we're having a lot of conversation, it's just that I didn't have enough time for this specific discussion. I could have shown this slide about 2030. Is that we believe by 2030, you need to have real tangible projects and opportunities that you have driving. And most of the markets that we're targeting for export are really not interested in talking to you if you are talking post-2030. They're all interested to hear what your 2030 product pipeline looks like. And if they're getting into a conversation of an offtake with you, it cannot be post-2030. It has to be pre-2030. So that's really my point on that specific issue. It's a signpost, but we're also starting with catalytic projects. On hydrogen mobility, there's a Rainbow Consortium that we're already looking to start moving hydrogen cars in the country. Thank you.
I want to come to you, Rebecca, around this localization conversation, because you already raised some of the value chain. Rita Bile, I'm this person, my apologies. You already raised some of the value chain opportunities, but also some of the issues. Do you want to just deep dive a bit in the localization opportunities?
Yeah, maybe also to respond to the gentleman's question on the R&D opportunities. I think the Department of Science and Innovation is spearheading most of R&D work. And I mean, the HISA program was visionary. When the world was not talking about hydrogen, in South Africa had HISA in 2007. And through that program, it built capabilities, right? So I think sometimes there are opportunities to really commercialize some of the innovations that have come out of the centers of competence. From the solar PV perspective, most of the innovations in our observation is they take place within the companies themselves because they have the resources that are that much more advanced. And so most of it happens there as opposed to at R&D facilities across the country, although there are pockets of excellence. What we may want to start thinking about as a country, and I think Thabo triggered that and jogged my memory around the secondary market, industries that we haven't even thought about as yet. Our studies show that the modules that will come off the farms or the utility projects will still be able to produce at 85% efficiency. And there's an opportunity to create a secondary market and research around, the extent to which innovative business models can be deployed to maximize that opportunity needs to be explored. So in a way, when we tend to talk about innovation from a technology innovation point of view, and again, I think Thabo alluded to the fact that we need to design and come up with innovative business models. So perhaps the research is required around what kind of innovative business models does a country need to get to this future that we are envisaging. But yeah, I would also like perhaps to comment on the grid and get the Master Silas to maybe also comment on it. It is indeed true that most of the projects were not allocated or were not awarded preferred bidder status in bid window 6. In fact, all the wind projects weren't able to come through because they overcommitted capacity. There is no longer capacity in the Capes regions, all the provinces with the Cape. So there are interim solutions that can deal with that. Whether it's curtailment, that's why there was also a storage bid window to deal with that challenge of the grid challenge. However, the mandate for expansion of the grid sits with Eskom Transmission. And one of the things that is being considered, or at least being spoken about, not officially, is to explore whether the country could implement a similar transmission program to the REAP program, generation transmission, because that is also very resource intensive. So I don't know whether they are official yet, but that is on the transmission side of things. The elephant in the room is the distribution network, and that resides with municipalities. Maybe thoughts and plans need to be taken into that. I actually don't know who's doing anything in the distribution space. I know Eskom does own about 50%, 40 to 50% of the distribution infrastructure, but 40% is owned by the municipality. So there are interim measures to deal with the transmission challenges. Distribution challenges will be the next big hurdle for the country to deal with, especially when you are now dealing with a spike of renewables where you would need to to balance the system or manage the system very carefully. So short term, in the long term, the Northern Cape will need to build a transmission network for another 10 years, and there will be no capacity. And interestingly enough, the Free State is also quickly running out of capacity. The next will be Limpopo. So there's a need to be really creative around that, and it won't take government alone to resolve that problem, because it's a huge challenge that puts the energy security at risk in the country. So we need everybody, the private sector and the public sector, to work together to resolve that challenge. Yeah, those are my thoughts on the grid, but colleagues can chip in on that specific matter.
So the local manufacturer one, right? So there's a couple of things. I think perhaps we need to put the word sustainable, because there's often I mean, we get it as a German headquartered organization, where someone walks in and say, you know, how do we localize these windmills, and, you know, that you make, and then you look at it and you say, it's a monumental conversation that you're trying to get to, because it's not just one thing. There's a multiplicity of stakeholders that you have to put in the room to even get to an agreement. So I think the reason I say sustainable is that perhaps maybe the model should be, and this is my personal view, I think it could work better. Have a look at all these renewables, they're in for 20 years, 25 years, right? Why don't we start with making sure that locals are the ones that maintain them? Start there. Because then that's 20 years, 25 years of activity, 20 years and 25 years of opportunity to then re-engineer. So from there, you start looking at what can be re-engineered locally, what is it that can integrate other SMMEs in maintaining these things. And then R&D can come in, therefore then you have a sustainable sector that could, so that's my view. But I think also what we're doing, we certainly do look at partnerships, where others come and say, I have a specific technology, can we work together? We see where there's synergies and so on. But it always comes back to two things. One is you are asking to compete, and there's no coverage. It's a global competition. So if you come with a technology and say, listen, can we talk about fuel cells? It's not a South African fuel cell. It's a fuel cell. You know, now with Teams, we could conversate with people around the world. They compare you on the same platform. So there's no coverage. And I think that's one element. The other element is the capacity one that I spoke about. The minute you come with the technology, you say, this is what I can do, let's partner. We look at whether there's capacity or not. If there isn't, there's a lot now that needs to be plowed into it and so on. So I hope that sketches a picture. The other one from, I think it was Nyasha, right, about the grid. I spent about a decade in maintenance. And you know, maintenance is not a sexy job. It's unlike when you build new projects and stuff. You cut ribbons, and maintenance is not sexy. And I think for me, the grid one, the effort that we need to place is on the grid maintenance. I think, you know, most people worry about generation and EAF and so on. I worry about the grid. And I think Silas can add on. But I think I'm more concerned around, yes, the expansion of the grid to integrate new renewables is important. But I think as a country, we've forgotten how to maintain. And it's not just the grid. If you look at, there's potholes, there's water, and I just think maybe let's stick to putting more people into maintaining this infrastructure, because it costs a lot, and you know the example. So, but I think a practical one, opportunity where you can get in. I think Silas did allude to it. The direction is very clear. It's a digital grid. That's where we're going. So opportunities on the grid front, you have to look at technology. You know, how do you put 4IR or whatever related to the grid and so on? I would say that that's the direction. And I mean, if we had a chance, I would show. There's one video which I really like around how we could be also inspecting transmission lines using drones as an example, and perhaps we could have caught the Tshwane one that collapsed the other day. Can you please play the video? It's about 1 minute or so. These are the ideas that I'm thinking more people need to go into this. It's not it's quite new, it's quite recent. There's a lot of legislation that needs to be there, but it's something that we need. It's something that I think could be of beneficial.
I think Silas. Silas, you wanted to just respond to transmission, I think, in some of the other questions?
No, thank you. I think I'll be doing the minister in justice if I don't tell Sasol. You are supporting the Green Hydrogen Summit, eh? Okay. So South Africa will be hosting the Green Hydrogen Summit. It's a big one in Cape Town, October? 16, 17 October. Yes, so be there if you can. I'm told that it's already fully booked, but force your way in. Industry is paying for it, you don't have to pay. From next year, we'll start charging. I think on the Sabvia side, she's right. You know, when I went into the game and people were telling me from a 10 million, wanting to have my assets as guarantees, yeah, it's not small monies. Hence, we only have majority European companies through their pension funds. Maybe our own pension fund, PIC, has to come on board here and help people. It's still a space not to leave to others. There's still enough space in there. So what we did, we forced them to do community trusts. DBSA paid for the trust. We're hearing some negative noises on there, but some communities are happy. They are multimillionaires. I mean, they own 10%, 20% of those projects. But the biggest one that will be coming, and if you listen to the minister talking, he talks about solar rooftops. The commercial ones that she's talking about in industry, I mean, ArcelorMittal is doing their own. Mall of Africa, somebody's doing it for them. Other companies are starting their own companies. So people are closing that space for themselves, and it's a big space. But the biggest one for me is the residential one. Because we are saying, I hinted a bit, 28 million people on grant, they can't afford electricity. We give them free basic electricity anyway every month, paid by Treasury. If we can invest once CAPEX on solar panels for those houses, including the RDP houses, will go a long way in solving the issue of unemployment. Because we're also working on the feed-in tariff, whereby we're saying, when you don't use that energy, feed it into the grid and let the grid pay you. I bet you they'll make more than the 350 we give them as government. So that one is coming, definitely. The Siemens, Tabung, I'm sure you can take a few women companies and empower them for all these green hydrogen, renewables, repurposing of power stations. Ne? I'll motivate the letter to Germany, Tabo. Then, I mean, you are doing it already, but you know me, I'm not going to stop. Do more. They've answered on the grid. I think the main thing is Eskom capable of building 14,000 kilometers of new grid? While we're talking Kusile and others, while Thabo is saying they should maintain the existing one. So we believe that there is a new way that could be leading to the independent power producers. We're calling it Independent Transmission Procurement Office, We are so skeptical. We're even not sure if it should be done by the IPP office itself, because it has failed some of the programs of Bid 5. So it could be something new. The good news is on the 21st this month, JSE is hosting a big financial conference at JSE, about 200 investors, people with money from all over, but led by South African JSE. There is about 200 billion that we can raise internally for that. The biggest question is, if all of that work has to be done, remember grade includes the substations. Will Siemens be able to supply us with the number of transformers we're going to need? No. So it's back to your question, what is the opportunity? When we did the Soccer 2010 World Cup, we imported so many transformers from all over the world. So we're heading to that challenge again where, especially on the biggest ones, you know, the mini substations, the big, small transformers, these guys can do overnight. But we definitely need new players in that space. The pylons that are carrying the overhead conductors, the steel for that, I think there's only 2 companies in South Africa. We need about 6 extra. So there are opportunities there, but they're going to take a lot of investments for whoever is going to go in. My advice would be partner with those that are doing it already globally. People are now prepared to bring in manufacturing into South Africa. You're going to see, we already have 2 PV manufacturers. Okay? But what is the KZN guys? Are they assemblers or manufacturers? They're all assemblers, okay. So we're forcing them to say, come and manufacture in South Africa. I think you saw the minister signing what people thought was the Chinese, Chinese funds as Chinese money. That was not the money. We're actually signing with Chinese manufacturers to say, come and manufacture in South Africa, and 8 of them are preparing for that. So there's a huge opportunity there. And start by assembling, nothing wrong with that. But your price has to be competitive. Because remember, it's a regulated industry. At the end of the day, at my house, I pay 1 rand 20 cents per kilowatt hour. I'm not going to pay 3 rand because you're expensive. So those that are cheaper than you will get the game, as Thabo says. It's solar, it's not written South African. We don't have anything in South Africa. It's still a Maputo. So I think I've answered everything, sis. Okay, on the EPC, surely there could be space for new players for the construction of transmission lines. I mean, it's all civil. It's a 3-meter deep foundation, concrete, steel work. A lot of these towers, no machine can build them. You build them by hand. Again, dust, chased by bees, snakes. Because where we're going to build these things, we're going to destroy some forests, which environmentalists are not talking about. We chase away wild animals. So there's a lot of work there that needs to be done. Acquiring the servitudes, 14,000 kilometers of servitudes. So I think, yeah, transmission, come to think of it, is bringing a huge opportunity, Maurice. Huge, huge. It's one of those where we can say, besides importing of equipment, on the labor side, on the EPC side, local people should actually be given the opportunity. We will be watching the procurement side of things, and you know how difficult it is in terms of procurement. You know? But the minister keeps saying our biggest worry is the COVID story. Things are more expensive. We don't want that in energy. So hence we're going around to check who can procure for us. Maybe the DBSA, maybe the IDC. Yeah, one head there said no DBSA, another one there said no IDC. So I also don't know, but I think time will tell. Thank you, Program.
Thank you. Thanks, Alice. I'm just wrapping up the panel then. Just a key few insights that are coming out of this panel. I think the first one is that, as Rebecca was saying, industries must be thinking about new business models as well as secondary markets. So there's a lot more that wasn't said in the presentations, but I think that are food for thought for some of the entrepreneurs in this room. I think everybody spelled out the value chains. Everybody spelled out where the business opportunities are. So those are clear. One of the interesting things that was also raised was by Thabo and in the Siemens Energy presentation is that while everybody's looking at the new energies, new technologies, the future, right now there's opportunities in efficiency, in getting better efficiencies out of the fleet that we have right now. Also in building local maintenance capability, because as you build that up front, then you develop that engineering capability that then you can leapfrog into manufacturing. So there's a point about what we can do now rather than look just at the future outlook. This issue about distribution and transmission network is very important. I think that at some point we're going to have to distribution, transmission, but also I think almost like the financing element. We're going to have to see if we can deep dive into one of our think tanks around this, because what's clear is that there's, as you were saying, Rita, distribution, as Silas said the same thing, that's the next big headache. Transmission is, we know it's a headache, but it seems like there's a solution space being developed for that. So as you fix the generation side, then you get into the issues around distribution and transmission that need to be fixed. Probably the last point to be made here, Dumisani raised it, is that the EU is creating these trade rules from their own perspective and for their own needs. So as South Africa, we need to design our own trade competitiveness from our own perspective and from our own endowment so that we don't miss the boat. CBAM doesn't need to happen to us. The Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, we don't have to see the train smash coming. We've got capabilities in country. We've got Sasol. We've seen the plans. We've got Severe. We have a sense of how much of scale of wind, of solar is coming out, plus wind as well. We've got the infrastructure. We've got the people. We've got the skills. We've got the capabilities. We've got the OEMs in country. Now, how do we organize that all those efforts and all those capabilities in a way that as a country we can drive our own competitiveness, but also do so in a way that women can be integrated into those activities. So I will leave that there, really. I think this was a hard-hitting panel. I want to thank the panelists for the deep dive for all of us.